So tell me about the proposed abortion legislation currently or soon to be debated and considered and voted on in Queensland.
In my view, and in the view of many thousands of Queenslanders who have responded to the committee, this is the most dangerous abortion legislation or reforms in the Western world. No other jurisdiction in 49 words has removed all of the protections to babies unborn and women as this bill does. It is such an atrocious piece of abortion legislation. I don't believe there can ever be any really good abortion legislation. That's an oxymoron. But this is absolutely atrocious, to the point that the bipartisan parliamentary committee, the Health Committee, that dealt with the bill over a several months period last year, came back with a finding at the end of their consideration that the bill not be passed.
Wow.
That's how bad it is. They listened to all the experts, the legal experts. They listened to the health experts and medical experts. They listened to university professors. They took all of the information on board, and at the end of that, a bipartisan committee, that's the closest thing we've got to a Senate in Queensland, said this legislation is so bad, it should not be passed. In effect, it got a fail. It got an F.
Wow.
Now, to me, that should be the end of the legislation. How could any member of parliament, and I could think a name of a number who are championing this piece of legislation in the government behind Mr. Pyne, how could they, in any sense of conscience, use their conscience to vote for something an entire parliamentary committee has said, this is wrong, this is bad, this is weakening our laws in a way that doesn't need to happen.
Completely ignoring the results of the voice of the people.
That committee
alleged accountability
had in two aspects. There's two bills. The first bill had 1,450 submissions, and I think the second had 1,000 plus-ish. I don't know the exact recall the last.
That's a lot.
Number. A huge, massive response to it. Over 80% of Queenslanders who wrote a letter or a submission to the committee said, we don't believe this legislation should pass.
Wow.
So Queenslanders have voted. Queenslanders have said, we do not want this legislation. This is very bad.
That's pretty objective.
Well, what sort of feedback do we want from the community? This is individuals writing in, emailing in, organisations, and with a very left-dominated media out there that is pushing this legislation as everyone should be doing it. It's a basic human right kind of argument. With simplistic messages, they still were not able to influence 80% of the Queenslanders who put something back into the committee. So if that's not a huge, strong outcry from the public to say no more. Now, if you want to go to all the arguments, you can go to the issues like there are large numbers of abortions in Queensland, between 10 and 12,000 every year. So there is huge access to it.
That's got to be at least a classroom of children a day.
It's a large number. Secondly, there's been no one criminalised, convicted under current Queensland law for decades and decades and decades. In fact, some have gone right back to more than decades and said there's no criminalisation happening here. Rarely even a conviction on grounds of abortion alone. Rarely ever a prosecution or attempt to prosecute on those grounds. So the reality is that it's a complete furphy. That it's likely that any Queensland woman who finds themselves in a situation of an unexpected pregnancy is going to end up criminalised by our current law. So in other words, a current law, while not perfect, is not broken, doesn't need to be fixed. If anything, perhaps like what's happening in America, we should be looking at the fact that there are so many abortions. They harm women. They definitely harm the unborn. They're occurring in great numbers. There's very little issue in terms of access. Increasingly medical science is on the side of those who care for the unborn, because in utero medical advances are showing us when the baby's heartbeat, it's showing us the organs are formed, it's showing, even if you want to argue about human life and when it starts, I believe it starts at conception. It's a separate human life.
So this is the most dangerous legislation in Queensland, if not Western world, if not entire world's history.
Absolutely. It's so dangerous because it takes away domestic violence protections against women. There are every day in Australia and every week in Queensland women who are being coerced into abortions against their will by men. But if a man is a real man and he stands beside the circumstance he's created.
Mm-hmm.
And he helps and supports the women. So many more women would say, well, that's all I wanted.
Yeah.
I wanted to know I'd be supported. I wanted to know I'd have the help.
Responsibility.
So men need to step up.
Absolutely.
Not interfere, but step up. Instead, many of them are coercing women, sometimes booking the appointment in the abortion clinic and saying, you will turn up. I will take you there, and you'd better be, or our relationship's over.
That's terrible.
What sort of relationship and what sort of men are like that? That is happening now, despite the fact that some of the professors in the debate in the committee from universities came and said, oh no, we don't think that's happening. We had almost a whole day of committee hearings where people who are counselling and helping women at the coalface are saying regularly they have women coming who are being forced into the abortions. Despite that, we have professors of universities sticking their heads in the sand and saying, oh, it's not really happening out there, because they don't want to believe it and they know it's impossible to argue against it. There is domestic violence and coercion happening in our society against women, forcing them. Now, if we remove the protections in the law that are there right now, then what happens to those women? That protection is gone in that piece of legislation.
Yep.
We've got gender selection, where girl baby abortion, just the fact that they're a girl. It's happening in Australia today.
That's terrible.
It happened. Dr. Mark Hobart tried to stand up against that in Victoria, and he had the draconian Victorian legislation that they want to copy here used against him when he said, I would not refer someone on as a doctor because they wanted to abort on the basis of the gender of the child.
I think in that case, that wasn't an unplanned pregnancy. That was actually a married couple who already had kids, and it was purely on the basis that they were discriminating against the gender of their baby. They didn't want a baby girl.
Yeah.
And so they decided to kill it. And Mark Hobart wasn't allowed to say, I'm uncomfortable with that.
So the question for me is, why would we weaken our laws and allow that to happen more? If anything,
we mustn't.
If anything, that probably should be tightened. I think most Australians would agree with that aborting because, well, we didn't really want a girl, is that really sufficient reason, really? Come on, I mean, you know.
Let's have a chat to some women to bring a more feminine voice into this argument and tell us more about abortion, the harms to women and children.